Hey folks, today's show is brought to you by Fanly, the best sports app to keep track of all your teams in one place. Get highlights, news, alerts, and tweets that make you a smarter fan. Get Fanly for free for Apple and Android, and you will actually be amazed. You put up with other sports apps all these years. Fanly just has a wider range of better info, plus its design is so much cleaner and better. That's Fanly. Get Fanly for free and get smarter. Let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Hey, hello. Welcome in. Thank you very much for listening. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Great show today. Hopefully, one that will help you with your upcoming drafts. We're revisiting the running back position, updating our thoughts about some players and about drafting the position in general. You can go back a few weeks to our running back preview to get a full assessment of the position, but we're here today to help you get some updates to that podcast and figure out if the landscape has changed. The fantasy footballers will be with me in the second half of the show to talk RBs. Really glad to have them on. They had me on their great podcast last week. It was a lot of fun, so I think you'll enjoy that. Not a ton of injury news the past 24 hours. Good to see Alshon Jeffrey's prognosis is fine. C.J. Anderson also seems okay. I guess we'll have to deal with another season of Chris Johnson, this time in Arizona. No, I haven't changed my mind. He's not going to be a lot more use than he was for fantasy teams last year with the Jets. I think probably can go at the ends of drafts, but I'm not anticipating him being much more than a drain on other players. Anyway, there's time for all this as we get to the show, so let's get going.
Today's kickoff.
And today, as I said, I'll talk about some running backs who've changed the landscape since the first time we talked about that position back in the very beginning of August. We'll do a mailbag, because what would this show be without random sightings of yours truly? I mean, how totally insane are all of us that in just 3 weeks, all of you and I have somehow decided that I'm a Z-League-like figure out in the world haunting people's daily lives. It sure is funny. We'll have a song today, and it's a great one, from one of my favorite bands in the world, Waxahatchee. So incredibly psyched, they agreed to let us play you a clip. Actually, now that I'm thinking about music, it does remind me, I may have mentioned I've got this novel I'm about done with about a band. It occurs to me to mention that I did part company with my literary agent, so if there are any agents out there who want to take a read, tweet me at Harris Football. Definitely looking around for representation. Anyway, and then, finally, as I mentioned, we will have the fantasy footballers on. They will help us round out our conversation about running backs, get you ready for your drafts, and get some fresh perspectives, which certainly, I think you'll agree, are useful. You heard at the top of the show, I was talking about a sports app called Fanly. I want to mention it again, but I want you to trust me. I made a decision when we decided to take ads on our podcast that anything sports or tech related, I had to believe in it for real or I wouldn't say it. And with Fanly, it's cool because I really do. I use Fanly myself. It's a really elegantly designed app. iPhone and Android supported. I have the iPhone version. It gives you information streams about the teams you want. That sounds a lot like a lot of other sports apps, but I mean it when I say Fanly's design is so much better than other sports apps you've used. I had pretty much had to stop using other sports apps because it was like too much, too clunky. I need speedy, man. I need like a really simple design and without intrusive ads. I'm psyched I got Fanly. I've been using it all the time. I can't recommend it enough. You'd be helping out the show, plus you'd be getting a legitimately good and non-clunky sports app by downloading Fanly. That's Fanly. Fanly. Download it now for free. And now to the running back revisit. Any discussion of what's changed at the running back position in the first few weeks of August this year has to begin with Arian Foster. That's the big landscape-altering event. He started as a fantasy first or, at the very worst, second rounder in just about any rank system you looked at. But in his first full practice with pads, he lived up to his brittle billing, suffering a groin injury that required surgery. The Texans have not committed to a course of action with Foster yet. They're going to check him again in a few weeks, and that's when they have to decide whether or not to put him on the physically unable to perform list. There is a chance that this was a relatively simple procedure, and it's possible Foster could miss only a month or 6 weeks. Clearly, as a result of this, Foster is no longer in the early round discussion. There's too much risk. Part of being good at fantasy is knowing what we don't know, and in this case, we don't know a lot. But you know the name of this game. We're trying to hit home runs in the middle rounds. And if things happen to break right for Foster, he could be a mid-round home run. Knowing what I know right now, I've got Foster right around, a 7th rounder in 12-team drafts, maybe a little bit higher in a point-per-reception league. It's like Sig Bloom said on this very program, if and when he's out there, Foster is a top 5 overall fantasy player. So what's left behind in the interim in Houston? Certainly the first preseason game left us with the impression that Alfred Blue gets first crack at being the main guy in Foster's absence. It's kind of almost become a cliche in fantasy circles, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, to say that Blue is a physical freak who looks good coming off the bus, but, when you actually watch him run, it's sort of pedestrian. But as we all know, sometimes it's about opportunity, and at the moment, Blue looks like the guy with the opportunity. Still think I'm taking Foster ahead of Blue, but they're close. My guess is that Blue won't be an every-week stud, even if he is the Texans' pure starter. And there's a risk that he's not. It's a risk that it works its way into a platoon. But I have to admit that when it comes to Blue, there will be a few games, if he does get to start, maybe a few is too many, maybe a couple, where he gets volume and makes bank. The likes of Jonathan Grimes and Chris Polk and Kenny Hilliard probably need to take a backseat to Blue right now. And remember, the Texans reportedly got close with Pierre Thomas, and they could revisit him later this month, and again, we might have to have another conversation. The other story that's rattling the RB rankings is the Lions, and if you're a subscriber to this podcast, first of all, thank you, and second of all, you've been listening to a lot of these episodes, heaven knows you've heard me talk enough about the Lions running backs here. I'll say for a guy who finished 14th in running back fantasy points last year, including 6th in the final 6 weeks, in which he helped a bunch of teams win fantasy titles, Joique Bell sure is having a bad summer. He's getting shoved around for his yards per carry, a stat which I still have no patience for. He gets shoved around for not recovering fast enough from his cleanup surgeries, for not being good, for basically not being Amir Abdullah, whose first preseason appearance went so well as to foment a revolution.
Eye roll.
Yep, heard it when I said it. I admit I've been steadily and gradually letting Abdullah rise in my ranks, but I'm still not nearly as high as his current average draft position, and frankly, Bell still looks like good value to me as the Abdullah hype gets going. But all that will be so much August blather if Bell doesn't get out on the practice field the next week or two. Please do, Joique. This is a stay tuned situation. I don't buy that Abdullah has won this fight before it's really even begun, but I admit there is a possible path where Bell never gets right and Abdullah just kind of runs away with it in September. You've also heard me talk about Joseph Randle enough, who's rising to an average draft position almost through lack of alternatives in Dallas and the great offensive line. After all, Randle himself hurt an oblique last week, didn't play in the first preseason game, basically has become more attractive as Darren McFadden hasn't been able to do much in camp. It's sort of a warning sign, right, when you're falling more and more in love with a guy and he actually hasn't done anything. The Randall hype train also threatening to run off the tracks. Some circles, he's a third-round pick. Man, I cannot go there. Yes, as I said, everybody knows it, Dallas offensive line is great, although are they going to have another season where they're completely healthy the entire year? I'm not sure. I definitely don't trust McFadden, but I'm not sure Randall's particularly good at anything other than running straight ahead. The risk is really big with him, and that keeps him at like a fifth-rounder for me. The Falcons running backs all seem to be getting vaguely healthy at the same time, but because they were all out with their respective hamstring injuries, it's been impossible to get a line on who might be ahead in the competition between Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. I've maintained all summer that I'd like to see Coleman get a clear win in this battle because I give him a better chance at being a feature back, while I think Freeman is a good, but probably not a great player who's best cast as a Shane Vereen type. But I've had to lower Coleman down to Freeman's level in my ranks because if you're drafting right now, we don't know who's going to win. And at this point, it's the easiest thing to imagine in Atlanta is some kind of platoon that just ticks you off from week to week. Those are a few of the situations that have caused me to do major re-ranking at the RB position. On the larger question of strategy for the position as a whole, I don't think I've undergone much of a rethinking. It still feels like a top-heavy position, and in most leagues, I'm leaning towards one of the top-ranked running backs in the first half of the first round. As you get outside those top 10 running backs, you run into so much uncertainty. There are possible home runs throughout, all the way down to 30 or 40, but, it'll be injuries and depth chart shenanigans that we just can't foresee that wind up elevating a few lower tier guys. I'm very okay with stacking up on a lot of running backs through the middle and later rounds with a strong bias towards high upside guys. I'll roster Tevin Coleman, Lorenzo Taliaferro, David Cobb. I'll roster those dudes for the beginning of the season anyway, just to see if they get some run, and I'll be fine dropping them in September for stuff I need if they don't get that run. Most drafts I do that use a at least vaguely standard scoring system, I'm coming out of that draft with more running backs than any other position, and I'm probably not bogging myself down with Fred Jackson, Reggie Bush, Danny Woodhead, Darren Sproles. I know what those guys are, veterans who, let's face it, their ceilings aren't very high. They'll probably have some nice games, and they'll probably wind up with more fantasy points than some of the lottery ticket type guys that I'll wind up taking late. But because their ceilings are so low, I just don't know that I'll ever be able to work them with any confidence into my starting lineup.
Time for the mailbag.
This is Devontae Morgan Freeman, and I think I should be the official voice of the little podcast that could, because my friend, Christopher Harris, crawled to freedom to escape the box score through 500 yards of trash bags and bouncing balloons that I can't even imagine. Or maybe I just don't want to. 500 yards. That's the length of 5 football fields.
That was genius for so many reasons. A good impression, but, how many memes did we get out of that little phone call? That was pretty good. Trash bags and T-rich balloons. Well, I don't have a feeling that's going to be on my gravestone. Remember, there is an actual real-life hotline where you can report on my whereabouts and the menace that I have been causing in the world. 786-529-2484. You don't need to remember that number because on your keypad it spells out Sunk by a Hug. Sunk by a Hug. We've got plenty of other voicemails all lined up on the airstrip, ready to go. You'll be hearing them all week and probably in your dreams. I've also got an email and a tweet for you. The email is from Julian Greco, who emails heyharris@harrisfootball.com. Julian says, "Hey Chris, love the show and really appreciate your work. I know it's lame, but I can't help singing What Does the Tape Say to the tune of What Does the Fox Say melody when you get a guest that is veering towards paint-by-numbers fantasy analysis. Keep up the good work. Julian. And then the tweet is from Brendan Hart, who tweets from @ellipticalman. I tuned in to Amber's podcast, and @Harris Football interrupted yet again.
Insert pointless sound drop here.
You see that? You see that? Do not encourage her. We are quickly drifting towards an ex machina type situation here.
Harris's music digression.
And today's digression, I am so psyched to be able to do this. This is one of my literally favorite bands in the world. If you listen to the Fantasy Underground, you remember a couple of years ago I said that Waxahatchee's record was my favorite record that year. Waxahatchee had a new record this year, 2015, called Ivy Trip. You can follow Waxahatchee on Twitter @K_Crutchfield. This song is great. They are great. I really hope you'll check out their entire catalog. This is Under a Rock by Waxahatchee.
Today's guest.
And today's interview is actually a four-way because I have the three members of the Fantasy Footballers on. They have a great podcast that I have appeared on and hope to appear on in the future. We had a wonderful conversation. And they have a website, thefantasyfootballers.com, that you should be visiting and getting all of your stuff ready for the year. Andy, Jason, Mike, how are you guys?
We're doing good.
Doing great. Nice to be on. Thank you.
You got it. So this is, as we've discussed, the running back update show. We're trying to reassess, giving ourselves another bite at the apple, as it were. And I've already given my prolonged, painful takes on Arian Foster, the Lions situation, Joseph Randle, the Falcons situation. But before sort of I dive into a bunch of other players that we haven't talked about yet on the show, how have, pick any of those situations at random, how have your assessments of those high-profile backfields evolved over the past few weeks?
Well, certainly you were on the show. You talked about the Joik Bell conundrum in Detroit, and that's been a hot topic on our show for many weeks, probably many weeks into the future. I've had a hard time surviving the
Abdullah Express.
Yeah, the Amir Abdullah love ever since his. I mean, I have to admit, being a Joik guy doesn't mean I can't be an Amir guy, and I think what we saw on the field in preseason game one certainly will mean I'm not going to see him in a lot of drafts.
Me too. I'm right there with you.
He's just going to climb up the draft board. So it's still hard for me to assess that situation without seeing Joik on the field, but I think there's a lot of excitement for Amir.
Yeah, I completely agree. The sadness of the monster cut seen around the world is that Amir, the guy who I've wanted to draft all preseason, or not preseason, all off season, is likely now going to be out of my reach because I'm not going to spend the third or fourth round pick it's going to take to get him.
Yeah, and agreed there. And Joseph Randle might even be going higher. Just someone in every draft who's like, hey, DeMarco Murray was pretty good there last year. I think I'm going to assume it's exactly the same production from Joseph Randle. Let's take him in the second or third. I have literally seen some average draft positions here in the past few days where he's a borderline second-round pick.
Oh, man.
I think it's the unknown factor, right? Because if you have a chance at getting somebody, even if it's minimal, even if your eyes are closed a little bit, I think you take it sometimes.
And
because
each draft only takes that one guy.
That's
One
right.
guy who knows what's going to happen.
And then he'll turn out to be right, and then we'll all wonder.
And you'll never hear the end of it.
That's right. Yeah. Falcons feelings. I mean, I mentioned earlier in the show, I really wanted Tevin Coleman to have put his nose out in front in this battle at this point because I felt like there was a chance he could be really useful in a Kyle Shanahan offense. But I had to lower him in my ranks, and now Coleman and Freeman are basically neck and neck, nowhere fantasy exciting for me right now if I'm drafting right away. Do you guys feel the same way just because of the injuries?
I still like Tevin Coleman. I think that he wins out the majority of the snaps. I see it being a little bit of a timeshare to start. They'll give Freeman some niblets here and there because he's the vet, and we've seen him in real NFL action. So it'll take Tevin some time to prove himself, but I think he'll rise to the top by at least halfway through the season. So it depends on the cost and the investment where I'm going to have to sit and ride that out. But Tevin Coleman's the Falcons back that I want on my team.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, but I couldn't keep him where I had him ranked. I mean, I had him ranked too high to start the year. I mean, I had him.
We talked about that.
Yeah, like 30 or something. Yeah, just not.
Yeah, I had him very high too, and he'll be dropping down my rankings, unfortunately.
Right, he has to come down. So you guys are in Arizona, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't. So of the three of you, are you all Cardinal fans?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So obviously you're all drafting Chris Johnson in the fourth or fifth round.
Oh, gross.
It's rough, man.
The people have been blowing up our Twitter asking about Chris Johnson, and they said, "Well, is he going to move up in your rankings?" And I said, "The only thing that's moving up is the vomit in my mouth thinking about Chris Johnson being on our team."
Yeah, I mean, I think he's an improvement on Kerwin Williams in the backfield. But, David Johnson, I think he's just back on the practice field, and it's going to take him some time. And Bruce Arians has been very vocal about the fact that unless he's on the field, in camp, in preseason games, he's not going to see the field during the season. So
Yeah.
I still think Ellington is who they want to give the 15 to 20 overall touches a game to. He certainly looked healthy in preseason game one, which was great to see, as did Carson Palmer. And so, in PPR leagues, he's even more valuable, obviously, because I don't know who's getting the ball around the goal line yet, as much as we'd love to predict that. But Chris Johnson's a depth play to me. I mean, veteran minimum contract, and I wouldn't be considering him in fantasy, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think the worst part about David Johnson's injuries, I think it's actually a hit to not only himself, but to Andre Ellington. I was very excited when they drafted him because I thought Ellington could go back to what he was his rookie year, where he's not having to carry a full workload. Because I just don't think he is built for holding that kind of that amount of touches. And I mean, even in college, he was hurt. It hurt his draft stock coming into the NFL. And I really thought David Johnson would help alleviate some of the load. And so before people go crazy on Chris Johnson, because we all saw he signed for $2 million, and it was you get that sticker shock. But then when you break down the numbers, there's no guaranteed money. He's a veteran's minimum. He could be cut if David Johnson starts showing up. Chris Johnson could be out of town.
I think we're agreed. We're not drafting Chris Johnson.
No, we are not.
Don't fall for 5 years ago Chris Johnson or whatever. He has some sprinter speed. He's still fast. That's about it though. So I want to open it up. I mean, if the topic here is running backs on whom your guys' opinions have changed, who do you find yourself shifting most on since you did some of your initial and investigative work, this summer and leading up to like August 1st?
Well, I'll go with Chris Johnson's former teammate here in Chris Ivory. I think that first preseason game showed me something in Chris Ivory that, and more so in the Jets themselves, their first drive, the all-important first drive of the first preseason game. But what happened was, they handed the ball off to Chris Ivory, then they threw once, And then the next 5 plays were all handoffs to Chris Johnson. 6 of their first 7, Chris Ivory, yeah. 6 of their first 7 plays were to Chris Ivory, and it really shows me Todd Bowles going there as a head coach. I really believe he wants to run the ball, and I think it's going to be the Chris Ivory show. And he looked good. He was gaining extra yards, tough yards, and so there's obviously the injury worries of being able to withstand that kind of workload, but he is certainly a talented back who's on a running defensive team. So he's been moving up my rankings, and I think he's still got a little bit of ways to go up for me.
Where would he land right about now for you? Like, if we were saying like 12-team league?
I think right now he's definitely going to be the back end of an RB2 in around the 2021 range. I've got him, I believe, right now at 25. So.
Okay, and that translates to make him a 5th-round pick, a 6th-round pick, something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, who else? Who else has got a guy?
Of the 3 of us, I have been by far the most skeptical on Latavius Murray.
Okay.
And not necessarily his talent, but just of the Raiders in general, where they were just a very low-scoring offense. They were extremely pass-happy because the defense was a bit porous last year. And I think I underestimated where the Rodney Hudson effect, where we talk a lot, probably a little bit more than I've heard other shows talk about centers and the importance of a center, like the Max Unger effect on Marshawn Lynch. And man, that line, we're talking preseason 1, but the line was opening up some very solid holes for Latavius Murray, where Murray still has not the greatest vision from what I remember and watching the preseason. It had quite a few times of running right into the butt of a lineman. But when he hits that cut clean and he gets through the crease, he's extremely explosive. So I think I've joined where everyone else had him, they kind of like a middle RB2 around there. And so he's climbed out of the 3 into an official 2 for me.
He actually learned that run into the lineman thing from his teammate,
Trent Richardson, yeah. The T-Rich balloon. Oh, yeah.
Did you see that video, Chris?
Absolutely. You don't know. You guys can't imagine how many people on Twitter forwarded me that clip. It's in the hundreds because the last podcast that I was on, the Fantasy Underground, we inspired a Twitter account at T-Rich Balloon. Basically, the conceit being Trent Richardson runs as though he is a balloon trying to find an open window. And it definitely wound up being a meme, and I got a lot of people forwarding me that.
You're going to have to take advantage of that meme because he's not long for the NFL.
That's right.
My favorite line was the
there's a bomb.
Give him some credit because there might have been a bomb in that huddle that only T-Rich could disarm.
I like it.
Yeah,
so where are we landing on Murray? Are we thinking of Murray as a 4th rounder in a 12-team, top 50 player?
I think that's the price you're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable with it. I don't think I'm personally going to take him in the 4th, but if he drops to me in the 5th, I'll scoop him up for sure. Which before I was watching that line, I would not have done that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be careful about assessing, based on preseason, but I think I'm with you on Murray though. I think I'm there. I mean, does anybody in the room have Murray any lower than that?
I don't.
Yeah.
I have him at.
Yeah, I was the lowest.
I have him at 14 right now.
Woo! Yeah.
I'm at 16.
The biggest concern with him is the fact that, and we looked at this a lot in the offseason, but I think 9 out of the top 10 running backs last year in fantasy were on teams that were 500 or above, and so there seems to be a real,
ceiling
connection. Yeah, a ceiling for Murray maybe, and a connection between being on these winning teams, and so that's what makes one of the guys that I've gone. When I say back and forth on, I mean you're talking from top 4 to back half RB1, but LaShawn McCoy is somebody that I've moved back up my board because I think the fear of that offense is so tremendous, and I understand it. I mean the quarterback play is going
what quarterback?
to be what are we talking about? But from people need to remember that Buffalo was a top 4 defense last year, and Rex Ryan's coming in, and that team will be hinging on the defense, and we have no idea who's even backing McCoy up at this point. I mean, he's coming off 2 seasons of 16 games played. I think his floor is so high as long as he's healthy in Buffalo. he might not be the most exciting guy to watch because he's going to take 20, 25 carries a game and average 4.1 a carry. But for me, I've moved him back up because I just think the workload's going to be there. I mean, 1,300 to 1,600 yards.
Can you get McCoy inside your top 5 or 6? Can you get him in that super elite group, or is he kind of one notch down from there?
No, for me, he is. For me, I have him at 4 right now.
Is that 4 overall in addition to 4 among running backs in standard leagues?
Oh, no, just 4 running backs in standard leagues, yeah. But
where would he be overall for you? Like, if you're picking in the first round, where do you feel comfortable now? I'm taking Shady.
Probably between 6 and 9.
Okay.
I mean, I'd be willing to take him there because I just think that I think the upside might be limited on that offense. They're not going to win a lot of games, but I think they're just going to hand him the ball. He's going to catch passes, and like I said, I mean, everyone's freaking out about your favorite statistic, the yards per carry going from I think 5.1 to 4.2, but I'll take 4.2 and 325 carries from him in fantasy. So he's moved up my board a little bit.
Interesting. He hasn't moved up my board, but he's 12, so he is the back end of the first round for me.
Yeah.
And I see exactly
overall.
Overall. Yeah, 9 among running backs. And I see what you see, Andy. I think you're looking at in the first round, what do you want? I mean, you want the guy who's not going to kill you. You want the guy with the high floor, and I think his range of possible outcomes is maybe a little narrower than you'd like for a first-round pick. If you could, get all the upside in the world, that'd be great. But, I mean, I also don't mind a lack of downside.
No doubt.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys about Spiller being out. Nobody's talked about the Saints' backfield. And that did not move Mark Ingram for me because I wasn't really thinking of Spiller as much of an early down threat anyway. And if anything, I think probably it helps Kyrie Robinson, but maybe I'm in the minority there. How panicked are you about Spiller as a fantasy asset himself, and how much do you maybe raise Ingram a little bit as a result of the knee surgery for Spiller?
I'm not moving Ingram up because I like Ingram a lot this year. I really liked what we saw out of him last year. Granted, it was his contract year. It was the first time we finally seen anything of him do it. But like I was talking about with the Max Unger effect, I think that has a tremendous impact for Ingram. Where if you guys, I don't know if you guys talk about Pro Football Focus grades, but the center play of the Saints was not up to par, and Unger fixes a big hole in that offensive line. As it goes to Spiller, it actually, you're not happy that he's injured, but it makes me happier that maybe his draft stock goes down a little bit, because I think it was, especially PPR, was getting a little bit out of control.
Yeah.
And I do want Spiller on my teams. I think his upside is tremendous. Where we're looking back a few years at the Darren Sproles years, but last year, I mean, the Saints targeted running backs more than almost any team in the league, and now Pierre Thomas is gone, Cadet is gone. That role is wide open for CJ Spiller to take if he's healthy, and as we've seen on Buffalo, if he's used correctly, CJ Spiller is an electric player who can really make it happen, and with Drew Brees being extremely accurate and them having to respect the pass, I think the upside for Spiller is tremendous.
Can you bring yourselves to trust him, though? Man, I mean, how many years in a row do we get? What's
the phrase? Fool me once.
Yeah, fool me 8 times, shame on me. But that 9th time, yeah. Can you bring yourself to trust him?
I can, but the problem was the 4th round pick that for PPR that you were having to invest. That's a little bit higher than I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So now that hopefully it drops maybe back half 5, maybe even 6 if people start getting really worried. And 6th, I will absolutely jump in.
Thinking this is certainly
you won't have to trust them then. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you can't let every single failure of the past impact everything you do in the future.
I thought you were going to say you can't make an omelet without breaking CJ Spiller.
Oh, come on now.
He does break a lot, though.
He does.
Yeah. It's tough for me to trust him. But no, I think you guys are talking about the right neighborhood. I don't think I'm going to own him much because, well, listen, I mean, point per reception is where he's intriguing, but I don't think I'm going to own him much. I just can't. I I can't. I mean, no one was as high on him as me back in the day, but boy. Ugh.
Oh, that's why you got burned too bad.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if it's me. Yeah, I mean, you do this business long enough. It's not so much owning him feeling burned. It's like talking about him on a podcast a lot and then getting burned and looking like a fool.
Yeah, if Abdullah comes out and bombs this year, Mike is going to never deal with Abdullah again the rest of his life.
And he probably won't own him at all, like he said. You know, he's not going to own him, but he owns him on the podcast.
Oh, he's on the hook for him. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I've claimed him.
Yeah. Anything about what the Eagles are doing? I mean, we haven't seen Murray run in a game yet, but anything about listen, I mean, we talked about it on your show. I talk about it on this show all the time. Don't listen to coaches. Don't listen to the propaganda. But anything about worries with more balance than we might have expected, raising Matthews and or lowering Murray for you?
I have excitement over that personally, just because I'm a little bit lower on Murray than some, and I'm much higher on Matthews than some. So for me, I guess you could say, from the other vantage point, I do have a little bit of worry. Both of these guys were brought in. Both of them are talented. Chip Kelly has a past in college where he's used a workhorse, and he's got a past in college where he's completely split carries between two quality running backs, and it always just depended on, does he have two quality running backs? He brought both guys in. Both guys are injury prone. One guy you can get towards the end of your draft. And so I just really like the value right now in Ryan Matthews, not so much as saying he's going to be great, but if I've got to invest a pick in one of these two guys, that's the guy that's probably going to end up on more of my teams.
Because he's just better value. You're going to have to spend the borderline first rounder on Murray, and you're going to be able to spend an outside the top 50 pick probably on Matthews.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Matthews is going to be on some of my teams. Just give me the shot, and I think very clearly the most valuable handcuff in fantasy this year. If you do make that commitment to DeMarco Murray, boy, you better be making that commitment to Ryan Matthews. Go ahead and reach a round before.
You can make some omelets with Ryan Matthews, too, I think.
I think, yeah, there's on some menus in some restaurants, there's a Ryan Matthews collarbone souffle.
Yeah.
Hey, those got to be like Wolverine bones by now. He's broken them so many times.
On that note, on the note of Wolverine bones, and I think if my podcast has a reputation for anything, it's generating memes. So I think Wolverine bones is probably
Perfect.
coming.
Make sure some adamantium in there.
Right. Just make sure whoever makes that account, you need to have some tip of the hat or reference to the fantasy footballers.
Right.
You guys are great. We'll do this again on both of our shows. This is super fun. Everybody should be following the fantasy footballers at the FF Ballers. We mentioned the podcast a few times. You can find it on iTunes and everywhere else you get fine podcasts. Go to thefantasyfootballers.com. Andy, Jason, and Mike, you guys were great. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Chris.
Our pleasure.
And that's it. That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you also to Waxahatchee for letting us use their fantastic song. I hope you check out their music. Tomorrow we'll be doing the same treatment for wide receivers, and look forward to doing that. Until then, hope you have a great day, and talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.